Welcome to another session of Healthy Hints from HAM. HAM meaning Health Advocacy Ministry. I hope everybody had a great summer. Okay, October is a busy month. Not only is it Breast Cancer Awareness Month, it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, it is our First Lady's birthday month, and between October 3rd and October 9th, we get a week for mental health. So, with that being said, um, as faith healers, we've been committed to keeping the mental health conversation alive. So, tonight we're going to talk about drug addiction and alcoholism. And if you wonder what that got to do with mental health, somebody will answer that question for you. On our panel tonight, we have Lillian Howard. And Lillian is the Director of Clinical and Supportive Services at Choices. Hi, Lillian. She will introduce herself, and give us a little bit more information about Lillian. Hi, Lillian.
Hi.
Lillian?
I have been in the field of alcohol and drug addiction and trauma services for over 30 years. And so as I'm doing this, I'm probably going to date myself as I start to do the presentation this evening and talk to you a little bit about certainly addiction and trauma and domestic violence, and also about the brain. One of the things that the field didn't know eons ago, because it's been around for probably about 50 years or more, when people started to look at alcohol and drug treatment and really starting to do things to start to help people who were addicted, is they didn't know that it was really a brain illness or a brain disease. And the field has come a long way in being able to identify exactly what's going on with the brain when someone ingests these chemicals and when people become addicted. Many times family members or friends will say, I don't understand why you don't stop doing this. And in many cases, people are not able to stop doing that because it is an illness and it is a disease that affects an individual. So tonight I'm going to just talk a little bit about the brain, and then more about how addiction affects the brain, and how people become addicted because of it. We can start to look at alcoholism and drug addiction similar to someone who has diabetes, someone who has high blood pressure, and other chronic illnesses that we deal with. And so I want you to kind of think about that in those kinds of terms. One of the things that we know is that the brain is this wonderful organ that is a part of our body, and without it functioning, we ourselves would not be able to function as well. And so one of the things that can happen when you become addicted is that it can be devastating on an individual and really be difficult when a person cannot stop using drugs. Even if they want to stop using drugs, they can't because of the consequences of addictions. And drugs can affect the brain. Mostly 3 areas of the brain is where drugs affect. They affect the brainstem, which is the brainstem is kind of in the back. And if I had a brain, I would show you this too. Unfortunately, I couldn't find one. But and we talk about this at work a lot, as well, as that we really need to have a brain on hand to kind of show people how trauma and addictions affects folks. But the brainstem is really in charge of all the functions of our body in order for us to stay alive. It affects our breathing. It is a part of helping blood to circulate throughout the body, and it also aids in us digesting food. Then we have the limbic system, and that really is a bunch of structures that are linked together that control emotional responses, such as the pleasure we get when someone gives us a kiss or a hug, or if we're eating chocolate or one of our favorite foods. The cerebral cortex is kind of the mushroom-shaped outer part of the brain, and that's kind of, if you remember grade school and anatomy, is called the gray matter in humans, and it's divided into 4 lobes. And those 4 lobes then control the important information systems of our body, such as our seeing, our ability to hear, our ability to taste and to feel. It's really the thinking center of the brain, and it powers our ability to be able to think clearly, to plan, to solve problems, and to make decisions. And then we move on to the other parts of the brain that send messages back and forth across our brain to make these things happen, such as circulation, digestion, thinking, and feeling. A part of that goes along with what is called the neurons in your brain. And I'm sure when you tapped into us tonight, you didn't think you were going to have to learn or be reminded a little bit about anatomy. The neurons of the brain are really kind of those nerve cells, and they are constantly working, sending messages back and forth throughout the body. Then there are the neurotransmitters, and that's the brain chemical messengers. And those are the ones that are like traveling from one neuron to the next neuron around the brain. And then you have the receptors, which are the brain receivers. And so as the neurons approaches the nearby, as the neurotransmitter approaches the nearby neuron, then it attaches itself to a special site on the neuron. I'm not doing a very good job of this, and I will admit that, but I'm just wanting to give you just a basic information of how things are working and how you have these different things that are connected to the brain that are sending messages back and forth. You have the transporters in the brain, which are the brain's chemical recyclers, and once the neurotransmitters do their job of sending a message and having something happening, then they are pulled back into the original neuron by the transporter. So they're kind of just waiting there until they get that message again to go back out and do whatever it is they're told to do. How does drugs affect the brain? Well, one of the things that we know that drugs are chemicals. And if you didn't remember or you don't know, alcohol is a drug. Alcohol is a legal drug. And so remember that it is a legal drug that people are able to purchase, but it is considered to be a depressant, and it acts like that in the body, okay? And we get messages about how great alcohol is just by picking up a magazine, listening to the radio, watching a TV show, or watching commercials on the television. But how drugs affect the brain is when someone puts these chemicals into their body, whether you're going to smoke it, you're going to inject it, you're going to inhale it, or you're going to eat it, it then starts to tap into the brain's communication system. And so it starts to have those nerve cells that I just talked about, and the neurons and the neurotransmitters. They're trying to send messages back and forth when you bring those chemicals into your body. So what it does is it starts to imitate the brain's natural chemical messages. And so you get overstimulated in the reward circuit of the brain. When we go to eat chocolate, the brain immediately, for many people, and I know my husband loves anything chocolate. So when a lot of people eat chocolate, it gives you this warm, relaxing, tastes good. Oh, that's just so good feeling. We got Thanksgiving coming up next month, and we all can remember what that's like for many of our families. There's a lot of food. A lot of times grandma has cooked the favorite recipe for apple pie, sweet potato pie, or sweet potato casserole or whatever. And you remember taking that in and how that makes you feel. Okay, and so that's exactly what happens when you take chemicals into your body. It starts to imitate the natural systems or chemicals that you feel when you take those things in. And it overstimulates that reward system of the brain. And then some drugs like marijuana and heroin, they mimic the neurotransmitter that occurs naturally in our body. And they start to fool our receptors, and it locks onto those receptors so that the receptors start to think, oh, I really just need to have this in my body because whenever this shows up, that's how it makes me feel. Cocaine and methamphetamine cause nerve cells to release what is known as too much dopamine, which is a natural neurotransmitter, and then it prevents the normal neurotransmitter from recycling throughout the body. And so one of the things that can start to happen with these things, and scientists used to assume that the rush of dopamine alone caused the feeling of euphoria and happiness when people started to drink alcohol or use drug use. But now they know that it's more complicated than that. It's not that dopamine is really being released. Many drugs, such as nicotine, cocaine, and marijuana, and other kinds of things, affect the reward center of the brain, which is a part of the limbic circuit. And so by doing that, one of the things that happens, which is actually very fascinating, is that the brain starts to learn that when I take this chemical, these things are released. So the brain starts to think, huh, okay, if you're going to release those things, if I'm going to release these things and these things are going to happen when I take this chemical, then the brain stops naturally making those things. It shuts itself down so that when the body no longer really releases dopamine naturally just because I'm having chocolate, it starts to only want to do it, or it happens when you are taking in those chemicals. The brain starts to adjust the surges of dopamine. And one of the things that starts to happen is you start losing that feeling of that naturally. And you start receiving it only when you're using some type of drug or alcohol. The long-term effects of that is that a person can then become addicted to that substance. Last week I was getting ready for work and I happened to walk through the kitchen area, and on the TV I had turned to, oh God, what was it? It was a documentary on Rick James. And I don't know if anybody has seen that or not, but it was on either Showtime or Stars. And one of the things that it talked about with Rick James, and I think we all know that he died from overdosing. And he had a long history of addiction. And one of the people, I think it was his wife or ex-wife, anyway, it was someone that was connected to him, that she had talked about the fact that he had been in and out of numerous treatment programs over his life. And she talked about the fact that many of the medical experts had talked about his body no longer made dopamine or serotonin naturally, due to the damage that he had done body through the use of chemicals. And so that is exactly what happens with addiction. The brain starts to learn that I am not going to release that chemical of you feeling good just because the sun is rising, or you feeling good because you're having this certain food. I really only do it when you take in this particular drug. And the drug really is doing the work and not the brain. The brain becomes very lazy. Which is why we now know that addiction is a chronic brain disease that causes a person to become addicted to it, and they continue to use it despite the harm that it causes in their lives. And we see that all the time. We see it especially with heroin users. Last year, when we were really in the throes of the pandemic and we didn't have anything to start to take care of it, we saw an uptick in overdoses in Franklin County. And the coroner was constantly sending out emails, as well as talking in the newspaper and on television about the fact that we really needed to be aware of that and let people know about it, what was going on, because the overdoses were really related to fentanyl being laced with heroin. And if you think about it, if I'm an addict, then I probably want to be careful. But if I'm an addict and I'm addicted to this stuff, I'm going to take whatever people give me, and I have a difficult time looking into the fact that what I might be snorting in my body or shooting up in my body may cause me to die, and no one may not be around to give me anything to bring me back. Addiction is one of those things that, despite all of the losses that people incur in their lives, whether that's family members, friends, jobs, their health, they continue to use. And what we know now from research is that they're continuing to use because one of the most important organ in their body that keeps and controls everything is really addicted to and affected by the chemicals that they put into their body. This was a very quick uh, uh, synopsis of, or a little education about the fact that it is not based on willpower, because if it was based on willpower, people could stop using. It is not based on the fact that it is something wrong with that person. It is really based on the fact that this person has a disease, and it is the disease of the brain.
Can't hear you,
Ella, you are
Ella.
on. Yeah, you're on
Ella,
mute.
you're muted, Ella.
I forgot. Okay, I'm sorry. Lillian, can you kind of tie that in with mental health? I did read somewhere where like stress, anxiety, and all those things could lead to maybe alcohol or maybe drugs or something like
Yeah,
that, which is a
I
myth.
think we can talk a little bit about that. What I can do is to talk about trauma. Because one of the things that we know now that we didn't know many years ago, um, and what I didn't know when I first started in the field back in the late 80s, I was really fascinated this after I got my master's degree in counseling, and I was a green counselor, and I was doing assessments on people who were coming into our little treatment center. And one of the things that I was fascinated back then was that probably 99.9% of all the women who were coming through there have been sexually abused in some form or another, whether they had an eating disorder, whether they were addicted to alcohol or drugs. And so what we know and what we continue to find out and what research is focused on is the fact that people experience trauma in their lives. And when they experience trauma in their lives, that causes them to have symptoms related to depression, related to anxiety. Many folks are diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and then they start to use alcohol and drugs to cope with the trauma that they've experienced from themselves from childhood on up. We know that when the pandemic hit, we heard this very clearly across the country. Liquor stores were still considered to be essential places. And so they were open, and many people were going and buying alcohol to deal with the trauma of the pandemic, of being at home with their kids, of losing their jobs, of working from home, or even those folks that are essential staff that were still going in and working face to face with people every day. That created trauma in all of our lives. And for many folks, they escape that trauma by using drugs and alcohol. One of the things that happens for folks who use drugs and alcohol as a coping mechanism is that it works. It's a short-term fix. And the next day you wake up and whatever you're dealing with is still with you. One of the things that can happen when you're using it as a coping tool is that it can cross over and you can become addicted to it. And so that is one of the things that happens. And so for folks who have mental illness and depression and anxiety and PTSD, and is experiencing bipolar disorder and other things, a lot of times that's related to the trauma that folks have experienced in their lives. And they're using alcohol and drugs to cope and deal with that trauma.
Thank you for that, Lillian. And if we have time, I want to come back to you. Okay.
Okay.
Davine? Hi, Davine.
Yeah.
Your
Hello.
turn. Hi.
Uh-oh.
Um, Davine is our substance abuse counselor. And what I wanted to ask her, first of all, is what are the duties of a substance abuse counselor?
Wow, that's a really loaded question because your duties can vary depending on who you're working with and what agency you are working at, whether you're in private practice or not in private practice. But overall, um, the duties of a substance abuse counselor is to come up with a diagnosis, to treat and actually to help the the client to recognize that there is a problem, and then to work with them in order to get them to change and modify that particular behavior that they want to stop. um, so diagnosis, um, and the only reason we have to do a diagnosis is because insurance says that's what I want. So insurance says I want a diagnosis, and if I don't have a diagnosis, then they won't pay. So we do have to give a diagnosis, which I kind of hate because it's almost like labeling people. But
Mm-hmm.
We have to give a diagnosis in order to get the insurance to give up the money so that people can get treated. Um,
Mhm.
but helping them come up with a plan, a treatment plan, and goals to work on, and then helping them to execute those goals. Um, what else do we do?
That sounds like a lot. Well,
Yeah,
do you counsel families in addition to your client? Maybe that client's
yeah.
family?
Sometimes you can't get away from doing that because families are their support. Families, friends, people that are support systems, and you can't handle addiction by yourself. You need that support system. So you have your counselor, that's one, but you also have family and friends that are close that are trying to help you if that's what they're trying to do. Because sometimes the families need education too. The families need to understand what addiction is and how it's impacting the person and the addicted person, and then trying to help them to stay off of whatever substance it is. And like Miss Lillian was saying earlier, that's a very difficult chore. It's not something that's easy, particularly when your brain is telling you, I need, and I want, and I want, and I want. So you have to have people that are going to be around you to help support you. Um, because there are certain triggers that will come up that will help them, or to um, that will help them or get them to the point where it's like, I want to use. It may be people, it may be certain friends that they used to hang around with, or places that they used to go, or it may be even problems within the household. Those things could be triggers for them to use. Or as Ms. Lenny was talking about, it might be the trauma that they're thinking about, or a dream that wakes them up and brings them right back to the same situation that they were in before, and they want to use to kind of cope with whatever the situation is. So family and friends and supportive people are very necessary in helping um, to work with a person that's addicted.
Okay, how does one go about um, getting a counselor? Do they have to seek a counselor out themselves? Are they in the facility and maybe the counselor is there? Or are they, well, tell me what sources. How do I get to a counselor?
All of the above. You just mentioned it.
Oh,
Sometimes people are, sometimes people will come in, they notice they do have a problem and they want some help. So they can come in themselves. Um, Sometimes people have family members that will recommend them for treatment or refer them for treatment. Sometimes the court mandates them for treatment. Sometimes parole officers will put it in their parole office and probation office will put it in
Mm.
as part of conditions for parole or probation. Um, those are different ways in which people can get to a counselor. But I guess the counselor's dream is to have somebody that comes in on their own, because that means
Mhm.
they're ready, they want help. Whereas
Yep.
if you're mandated into treatment, somebody's telling you, I have to go, and then you have to work
Mhm.
with somebody who doesn't believe they have a problem, but they're just there because I have to be here. It may be even a job. They may be trying to keep their job or work, and the job says, you have a problem, something's going on, you need to go to treatment. Um, so, in order to keep that job, they go to treatment. So, those are
thank
different
you.
sources that make those referrals.
All right, thank you. I'm going to go back to Lillian, Miss
Oh.
Lillian. Um, we briefly discussed this before we came online. We talked about um, how maybe um, you can avoid being a substance abuser. Okay, um, can you avoid it? How do you avoid it?
I think, yeah. Is that
Well,
the
let me
question
ask you
you're
this:
asking? Can you?
you ever heard the term? Some people say that they're just social drinkers. Oh, I only drink maybe one or two, or only on the weekend, or something like that. Can that lead
Mhm.
to alcoholism?
Um, I would say that person probably was never a social drinker, maybe. It depends. Um, I think it certainly depends. It depends on what you're what you're using. One of the things that we know is that, are there such things as social drinker? Yes, there certainly are. Some folks that can have one or two drinks and then they're done. And I've worked with folks in the past who couldn't do that. I had a boss who shared his idea was that after parties that, people would leave drinks on the table and not finish, and they would leave the party, and he didn't understand that. Alcoholics typically don't. And he would go around and finish up all the different drinks that were left on the various tables. People get addicted in some ways accidentally, I would say. And one of those ways that happened with the opioid crisis that we've been dealing with for the last several years. Although that affected some smaller communities and it affected very rural areas in the past, it did kind of cross over, and it affected people in the African American community as well as urban communities as well. We had pill mills that were set up, and doctors were there to hand out pills right and left. And it may have been a person who never was addicted to in their lives. There may have been a person who could have one or two drinks and fine. But once they started to become addicted to the pills, that became their drug of choice. And we know that opioid addiction is similar to heroin addiction. It's one of the most powerful addictions that you can have, and it can be very difficult to deal with. So do I believe that I don't know that I've answered your question. There are certainly certain things that there are certain people that I would say, yes, can be social drinkers, but it can cross the line for sure, depending on what you're using and the method that you're using.
All right, thank you guys. Clark, hi Clark.
Hello.
Okay, well,
How are you?
I'm great. Clark is our guest that's in recovery. He has corrected me a couple of times when I say recovered. No, in recovery is what he tells me.
ING.
Clark.
Mhm.
Clark has
Mhm.
sent us his story. Is going to tell us his story via a video, and then we'll ask Clark a couple of questions after that. So, Mike. Would you run the video, Mike?
Hello, my friends. My name is Clark Gillard, and on most days, I'm a grateful, recovering addict. I'm here to share with you. Any addict can stop using, lose the desire to use. But for Clark, I had to find a new way to live if I expected to have any ongoing recovery, if I expected to live a whole and fruitful life full of happiness and prosperity. I've always had a loving. When I say mother's love, I mean woman's love. Don't misunderstand me. I'm the youngest of 5 brothers, and we all suffer from the disease of addiction. First one I lost died from complications of HIV, AIDS. My second, which is the oldest brother, who taught me what he thought was good news to me, thought was good information for me, died from all kind of organ failure. Have you ever seen a 9-month-old pregnant woman? Have you ever seen a man swell up like that in the stomach area? That's my oldest brother. Was so tender you could not touch him in the midsection. These were my life instructors. My dad was in the life. My dad would tell me things like, Clark, don't you never use no drugs. But you get you a bobo and y'all sell drugs. It's perfectly all right. That's perfectly all right. That's commerce. That's perfectly all right. And Lord, I can't forget my first son, my firstborn son, Clark Jr. Of course, when I got clean, I owned property. I let him have one, and I said, hey, I gotta go. You can have all this. And he was at the age of 15, and I'm taking responsibility for that warehouse that he went through. He stayed there, became the drug dealer, whatever they want to tag it now. But later on in life, I got clean, visited him. We bonded on prison visits, if you know what I mean. We got to know each other with guards saying, don't do this. Sit over here. We bonded in a way where he respected me. Because I never gave up on him, but I should have been there when he needed me. 80 babies needed us. Babies in the 80s. When crack came out, they needed us. Moms took over, grandmas took over, but the daddies left. I'm one of them. I learned to be a holiday. I'm gonna visit you on a holiday. I'm not gonna be here 24/7. Your mom got it under control. Thank God for a mother's love. Talking about women that took care of me all my life. And I'm making some payments today. I'm making payments. And let's talk about my queen, my mother, who went with that AIDS. Went with my brother who contracted AIDS, and I ain't gonna tell you. I'm gonna tell you something. He was the only brother that wasn't an intravenous drug user. But when we talking about addiction, we talking about habits you cannot control, and they run you. We're talking about uncontrollable vices. It is easier to train a child than it is to change a man. My strength comes from the greatest power source on earth. No, it's not fossil fuel. No, it's not solar, any type of green energy you want to think of. My greatest power source is a mother's love. It has held and hugged me all my life. At the young age of 12 years old, I was responsible for taking another person's life. And a mother's love, once again, held and hugged me and saved me despite me taking her only son's life. She held and hugged me still. Once, that millennium year, 1999, I'm 10 years clean by then. We just happened to meet New Year's Eve, 1999. You know when you just feel uneasy and you think you shopping, but you really copping. You running around the stores trying to make you feel better. I met my queen 30 years later. We recognized each other immediately. We both were overcome by emotions. She left the store after we hugged and cried on each other. And I had a chance to say thank you for a mother's love. Before I could leave the store bawling, another young lady came in and said, I want to thank you. I want to thank you. My mother wants to thank you for saying what you said to her. And see, that was her only sibling when I took his life at the age of 9. She had had another child, which that was the queen that came in that said, my mom wants to say thank you. And right then, that second, that moment, that hour, that day, I knew I'd been touched by unconditional love. I had a divine purpose in life then, and I knew from that moment on I would never use drugs again. I had purpose to my life immediately. From a mother's love, there's no love more powerful. I finally was able to forgive myself. Everyone in the world probably had forgave me, but I haven't forgiven myself till she confirmed with me that she didn't hold no grudges, no animosity. My hopes are that I can continue to make spiritual payments on my journey. Lord knows I've made a bunch of withdrawals from society. I've been pardoned. My hope is not that I'll never miss a Sunday service. My hope is that every day I could be of service to someone who's suffering from the disease of addiction. My hopes are that you hear my story and dance with me in my glory. My hopes that you don't never, ever, ever be without encouragement on your journey. My hopes, of course, is that no one ever dies from the horrors of addiction. Any addict can stop using. Remember, it's easy. Any addict can lose the desire to use. It's very easy. But like Sandy W., one of my predecessors, always used to say, sooner or later, Clark, you're gonna have to love the things you have, not have the things you love. And that shit was so true in my life. I got out the way, became a bit self-supporting via a 12-step program, an in-house recovery program, planted the first seed in Clark's mind that I could recover. And there I got around people, man. You got to get around people, real people. People that's been there where you at, people that's on the other side. But my first wife has a lot to do with my recovery. She supported me while I was in treatment. That family day, it means something. She supported me when I got out of treatment. And of course, you know what I did when I got out of treatment. I pissed all over her help. I learned a lot of things in my life. Man, the tool of listening is a rare tool, but I gotta keep it sharp. It's a rare tool that's often needed, because I went all over to 12-step programs and the things I've learned, man, like what money can and cannot buy you. Money can buy you all kinds of meds, but money is not gonna buy you health. Only you can buy health. Come with me. You heard my story, and those of you who know me know I love for you to dance with me in my glory. I'm gonna have to steal a quote. I always say love is overrated. And I say, if love is overrated, I love overrating. I love the overrating love gives me. If love is overrating, please overrate me. Please, Lord have mercy. What else can help us but love? The type of love that you don't see coming because it comes for no reason. It comes when you think people are hating you. It comes when you realize that forgiveness, this is a freedom. When you realize freedom is one of the strongest assets. Forgiveness is one of the strongest assets you can ever have. When I finally realized that I had purpose, and it may not be the masses' purpose, it may not be something that's going to make me rich or famous. It doesn't matter, because it makes me happy. I'm Clark, and I'm on this day a grateful recovering addict. Thank you.
Thank you, Clark. That was an amazing journey that we just went through. Three things I kind of got from your video, though, that kind of helped you through your recovery is family, your mother, forgiveness,
Yes.
and the 12-step program. So, Clark, what are you doing now?
Same thing I was doing the first day I stopped using drugs. I still attend 12-step programs, and service is what they provided me with to fill in the holes that was in my spirit. They done a real good job talking about the clinical part of all this, but I don't know if you could put a finger on who's going to make it, who's not going to make it, this or this or that. It's a lot of spiritual damage that's been done to our society. I ain't going to say just our family or our household. To society, our spirits has been damaged. And that's just what the 12 steps provided me with, was a lot of love, shit, to not beat around the bush, a lot of love.
So, I also was told, Clark, that you're a sponsor. Do you sponsor
Of
other
course, yeah.
addicts?
Yes, I do. And I also, more important, have a sponsor, someone I could tell on myself with. Because like I keep reminding Ella, that we don't recover, we're recovering. And your sponsor, someone you can tell, you just got to have one somebody. I had to have one somebody I could tell the truth to. And I knew it wouldn't be, I wouldn't be judged or anything like that.
Thank you so much for that, Clark.
You're welcome.
It's been a quite a good session this evening with everybody. Mike, do we have any questions online?
Not yet. I think you had to ask for it.
Okay, so if anybody have any questions they'd like to ask these people that are on our panel this evening, feel free to do that. In the meantime, I want to go back to Lillian. We talked about that this month is also Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Can you how does that kind of tie in with alcoholism and drug abuse? Domestic violence.
Many survivors of domestic violence use drugs and alcohol in order to cope with the trauma that they experience in the relationships that they have with an abuser. Again, like I said earlier, using drugs and alcohol is a way to deal with and cope with the trauma that you're experiencing in your lives. And it's not the healthiest, it's not a healthy coping mechanism for sure, but it is something people certainly use in order to deal with the trauma. Sometimes abusers also force victims or survivors to use with them. We got a call earlier this week, and one of the things that I was reading about is a person had shared when she had called our hotline that she had gotten beat up because she had refused to, I think, drink or use drugs with the abuser. And so the abuser got upset with her, and she was badly beaten because of that, and also strangled because of that. So abusers force their victims to use with them, and then it is also used as a coping mechanism to deal with the chaos and the confusion that's going on in that relationship.
Thank you. I do have, for those that are watching, if we have someone that's in crisis or someone who doesn't know who to call for whatever they need in this situation, I've got numbers here that I want to provide you. These numbers are Net Care Access, that's for mental health and substance crisis. We have our Alcoholics Anonymous number, Narcotics Anonymous, and Al-Anon, Alateen is for teenage families or just family members of someone with an addiction. So anyone who's looking for a group, some type of support group, can by all means use these particular phone numbers to contact someone. I think it's been a great session this evening, and I'm glad you all were able to join me this month with our alcoholic and drug abuse session. It was a great session. I thank you all so much. We don't have any questions. So, you guys, thank you so much for joining me, and have a great evening.
Thank you.